welcome colleagues to this new edition of our research seminar. This week we have the participation of Professor Paulo Silva from the University of Sao Paulo. I'm okay, right? Oh no, sorry, for Campinhas.
Campinhas, yes.
University of Campinhas, sorry for that. Paulo has been in Ecuador a couple of years ago, I think, for the first walk, and well, since then we have a connection with his work. And today he's going to talk about this using optimization for intervention against COVID-19, this very actual, important and very, let's say, hot subject still. So thank you, Paulo, for accepting our invitation, and the audience, the screen, the Zoom is yours.
Okay. So thank you very much for the invitation, and I hope you like my talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that I have been working on since May of last year, which is on how to use optimization to model and to compute intervention measures against COVID-19. And this is a joint work with many people. Then I will talk about the specific authors during the presentation. And I'm from Unicamp, from the Mathematics Institute of Unicamp. I used to work at São Paulo, so that at University of São Paulo, that might explain why the little confusion before. And this work was supported by FAPESP and Instituto Serra Pilheira. Okay, so here we go. To talk about the subject, I need to introduce the idea of compartmental models. I think this is something that people are already starting to get to know well, so maybe I should not waste too much time on that, even though the talk is thought in some way that I should use some time to explain that. And then I will show that starting from the compartmental model, once you define which are your state variables and your control variables, you can actually write a control problem that you can use to decide on how to intervene to control the COVID-19 outbreak or any outbreak actually. And among the things that we have to do when we're modeling our problem, we have to decide how to model the ICU demand. I will talk a little bit about that. This is where basically where we add some kind of stochastic flavor in our problem. And I will present some case studies that we've done in different works we have submitted for publication. So let's start with the compartmental models. Those are very simple models that try to capture the dynamics of an infectious disease. And the basic idea is to group the population using stages according to their stages on the disease in compartments. And the dynamics is basically given by the rate of movement from one stage to the next. Okay, or to another, because sometimes there is not only a single next stage. There might be more than one possible next stage. And compartments interact if the input or the output of those compartments depend on the population of both stages. So the simplest model is the SIR model, the susceptible, infectious, and recovered model. And here you divide the population into three groups: people who never had a disease, people who are already infected and are transmitting the disease, and people who are not transmitting the disease anymore and they are recovered. Since there is no arrow pointing from recovered back to susceptible, we are assuming for the time being that for the sake of the simulation, people that are recovered, they are not susceptible anymore. So you are assuming that this is the kind of disease that creates some kind of protection for the person who got it. And then once you model the idea that you have a disease that it's transmitted by contact between people, and once two people have a contact, there is a probability that the infection can spread, that the person might contract the disease, and that and you decide to consider the mean of over the whole population, and you also assume that the infected people, they are spread around evenly around the population, you arrive in this kind of rates of change from one stage to the other that can be described here by an ordinary differential equation, a simple ordinary differential equation, which basically says that from susceptible, you become infected by having a contact with someone who is already infected, and the probability of your encounters to be with infected people is I over n, where I stands for the number of infected people and n is the total population. And the number of contacts that are between those two kind of people is S times this probability. And there is some parameter here, which is called beta, which it tries to measure the probability that a contact might create the spread, and might induce the disease. And from infectious to recovered, you have a very simple decay model where you say basically that every single time step, the person might recover given a certain rate, which is this gamma rate. This is exponential decay model, okay? So once you have this, you write the differential equations. They're very simple. And what is very nice about this is that it already captures reasonably well the dynamics of this type of disease, and it's also a very flexible model. In what sense? In the sense that you can add extra states to model different stages with respect to the disease. Before doing that, one of the things that we usually do is that we rewrite the equations changing a little bit the notation. So we create a parameter which is called R naught, which is basically beta divided by gamma. And it's called the basal reproducible number. And it stands for the number of people that infected person is expected to infect during his infection period. And you have another parameter, which is the time of infection, which is the mean time that a person remains in the infected state. And once you do this and you normalize the population, dividing everyone by n, so that the number of people in S, I, and R are now, they add up to 1. So they are basically proportions of the population that are in each of those stages. You arrive at this differential equation that has this extra constraint here, which is if your initial condition respect this constraint, since the sum of the derivatives here are 0, because everyone that leaves one state gets inside the other state. So there is always this relation that what leaves S enters into I, what leaves I enters into R. So the overall population is preserved, is constant throughout time. So once your initial conditions conform to this assumption, any solution of the differential equation will also obey this constraint. Okay, and then you can start thinking about how to better model your disease. For example, in the case of COVID-19, there is an important state, which is the people that are already exposed to the disease, but they are not infecting other people yet. So we add this extra compartment called the exposed compartment. So you have a new variable, which is the E variable. And now the person, when it becomes sick, when it gets infected, actually, it goes to the exposed compartment, but they don't transmit the disease yet. And then there is an exponential decay here also. Now, they move to the I compartment with a constant rate, okay, such that they have now a time of being exposed, the incubation time for the disease, okay? And now you have an extra term in your differential equations, but they look very similar to the previous ones. And here, what is interesting is that if you think about the parameters of this differential equation, this R naught parameter, it can be seen in two ways. It can be seen as a parameter itself, so it's something that is given by the disease and by the population and things like that. But once you think about it, it's also something that you can act upon. How? because the R0 is basically the number of people that an infected person in a population that is completely susceptible is the number of people that that person would infect during his infection time. But if you change the way the population behaves, for example, forcing some kind of social distancing, you may change this ability of the disease to spread. So you are basically trying to control, you're trying to decrease the R0, okay? So R0 can also be seen here, not as a parameter, but as a control variable that you can act upon with different measures, usually non-pharmaceutical measures, so that you can change the dynamics of the disease. Similarly, if you had good medicine for the disease, we would act upon those times, the time of incubation, the time of infected, because it will make people go to recover it faster if you had a medicine that would make the person get well very fast. So since we don't have good medicine for COVID-19, our natural candidate for control variable is the R0, which will become an R that depends on time, and we can decide at each moment of time how the population will behave in such a way that will drive the R0, will drive it down, we will make it lower, okay? And now that we saw that we can add extra compartments to our model, we can actually model many more things. One example is if you consider the state of São Paulo, this is a picture of the state of São Paulo. And here, these lines, they represent the number of travels that you have every day from some regions of the state, some cities of the state to other cities. Here is this is the capital of the state, the city of São Paulo, the big metropolitan area of São Paulo, and everyone goes there. But you can also see that there are other regional centers of attraction, of movement of people. And those centers, they are important because usually they have the biggest facilities, health facilities in the States. So people that are sick around here, they'll probably go to this region, to the city. And also, once you understand how many travels you have between all the places, you can also model how the disease will spread, because someone who lives, for example, here in Campinas, how the disease spreads from São Paulo to Campinas, because someone from Campinas go to São Paulo, stays there for a while, makes some contacts in São Paulo, get sick and go back to Campinas, and then you have one extra person sick in Campinas that will spread locally because the person will stay in Campinas, for example, during the night or during the weekend. Okay, so this was a joint work with Luiz Gustavo Nonato, Pedro Peixoto, Thiago Pereira, and Claudia Sagastizabal. And here what we decided to do was to extend the CIR model so that we had many copies of CIR populations that represent the populations in each of those regions. And we had information about the number of travels. This was something that Pedro Peixoto had using cellular data. He had developed a whole way of doing the estimation of the amount of travel that you have from one city to the other. We are focusing here in the travels that create a longer stay, like someone who goes to work in one city during the day, but at the same time, they go back to sleep back in their original city during the night. Okay, so you have many populations, but now, instead of having the simple dynamic where the person can get sick only from their own, in their own city, you have a more sophisticated dynamic here. It should be equal, it should be one equal. There should be a equal here. A more sophisticated dynamic where a person of city I can get infected at city J, because there is the number of persons that they are susceptible from the city I's and go to work during the day at city J. And at city J, they will see the infected from the city J, but not the real infected from the city, but actually an effective number of infected in the city J, because you have the influx of people from other cities going to city J during the day, and they will be subject to the local reproducible number in CDJ. So for example, if in CDJ you have to wear a mask, the R0 in CDJ, because we're in CDJ, you are wearing a mask, the R0 is lower in CDJ than it is in another city, in your original city where you don't need to wear a mask, for example. So once you write this kind of thing and you think a little bit about the model, you can actually write a very big model that have all those population coupled through this matrix that determines how people go from one city to the other. Okay, so this is one of the things we can do. This is one of the things that we did, actually. Okay. Another thing that we did, this was a joint work with Marcelo Córdova, Luiz Gustavo Nonato, Pedro Peixoto, Thiago Pereira, Cláudia Sagastizabal, and Claudio Struchner, is to model the situation where you know that you can test infected people and discover that they are infected before the total time that they will remain infected, and then you can move them to a quarantine state where they will stop infecting people from that moment on. Okay, so in this case, what we had is that we wanted to decide how much we should test. And we did this in the context of the whole state. So we decided how much we should test at each region of the state according to the present situation of the pandemic in each region, so that we can decide that, okay, so now the pandemic is worse in that region, and then it's better for us to go there and do more testing than is in this region, because here it's better, it's under better control. So if you don't test more in this worst region, more people are going to go to the hospitals, and the hospitals in that region will become overwhelmed. Okay, and we were able to do this in a very simple way because Thiago Pereira had already studied that subject before in his own research. So we had a simple model that was able to capture this idea of testing. There is no contact tracing here. You just test the people that appear in the facility, in the health facility, and want to get tested. So usually the people that you test are basically the people that are already sick or close relatives of people that are sick, that know that their father or their brother are sick, so they also go to the facility to get tested. Okay, so this is something we also did. This work here with the model and the code and all this stuff and some simulations for a specific situation is already published in PLOS One. It was published like 2 weeks ago. And finally, another thing that we did was to use these ideas to model a vaccination campaign. So here, what we have a population that has this SEIR model, but we divide the population in 3 subgroups that represents the state of that population with respect to the vaccination campaign. So in the first group, the person didn't have received any vaccine. In the second group, they already received the first dose. And in the third group, they already received the second dose, so they are fully vaccinated. Okay, and then you have to decide how much you are going to vaccinate people from each of those groups, and which is this variable V here. So at every day, for example, you decide how many people you are going to vaccinate in this first group. This will induce a movement from the first group to the second group. Okay. And you also decide how many second doses we're going to give in a given day. And then this induces a movement from the second group to the third group. Okay. And once you do this and you write the correct equations, you can actually use those number of vaccinations as control variables so that you decide who, because we don't have a single population here. We have divided the population in age groups. So you have to decide which age group is going to be vaccinated in the next day, and how many first dose we're going to give to that group, how many second dose we're going to give to that group. And one of the things we wanted to access here was whether the optimal control method would decide to postpone the second dose depending on the efficacy of the first dose with respect to the second dose. Okay. This work was also published already. It's published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. It was published like 2 months ago. So with all of those models, you have different state variables and different control variables. And by doing this, you can write a mathematical optimization formulation, which starts from a control problem and goes to optimization problem by a discretize and optimize approach. So usually your state variables, they represent the population in their different compartments, which are the S, E, I, R, and Q. Q is the quarantine compartment if you have quarantine due to tests. And you also have control variables, which might be the R0, which is not R0 anymore. It's not a Basel number, but it's a number that you change every day, or you can try to change every day. The number of tests we're going to use if you're considering the testing case, and the number of vaccines for first and second dose that you're going to use if you're trying to understand the vaccination dynamics. Okay. And you assume here that both variables are functions of time. And what you need to find solutions x of t, e of t that satisfy the differential equations that comes from the model. Okay. And this can be written in this way here, which is usual for ordinary differential equations. And then since we are more like optimization people instead of control people, we simply go from here directly to optimization problem by discretizing the derivative here. And since this differential equation is a simple one, a simple center difference discretization is enough to get a very reliable solution. Okay. And now your dynamics become discrete dynamics that looks like this. Okay. And you have to estimate your initial conditions, and you can actually use optimization to estimate your initial conditions if you want, because you can write a problem that has the constraints like the ones we have here, and you can use as objective to fit the data that you already have about the disease, about the pandemic. And you can also have extra constraints here. They're going to talk a little bit more about them, but they can do things like ensure that, for example, the number of people that become sick is not so high that you have problems with the number of ICU units, intensive care units that you have. Okay. And you can add some kind of objective that will depend on x of t and u of t. Usually we use u of t to write our objective. And usually our objective is that we want this R variable to be as high as possible because we want to control the disease by letting the people work and go on with their life as normally as possible. And if they live normally, this R is going back to the original Basel reproducible number. So we have a constraint that said that R is always below the Basel reproducible number, the original one, and we want to make it as high as possible or something like that. We also had other objectives, but the most important objective in some sense is this one. And how we model the demand for intensive care units. So the most important objective of the model is to try to maintain the economy as open as possible while avoiding the collapse of the health system. And here the collapse is it identified with the saturation of the capacity of the intensive care units. The capacity is usually known, and we can actually act upon it on time. So we can, for example, say we need more capacities. So the government can tell us that in 1 month, we will have 20% more ICU units or something like that. But we want to estimate the demand of the ICU units. And what we know is that the higher the number of infected people, the more ICU units you're going to need. Using the differentiation, we can estimate the number of infected people, but we need to find out what is the proportion of those people that need intensive care. So we can, if we had that proportion, we call whole of T, which would be the proportion of the infected that need intensive care at time T, then we could write a capacity constraint that looks a little bit like this, which is the whole of T times the I of T, the number infected, in a certain time window, which is basically saying that this time window is the mean time that people stay in the ICU unity. So you are basically integrating and assuming that this ratio is constant in this time window, which is basically 7 to 15 days, depending on the situation. And this you will say how much you need to take care of those patients in that time window, and that has to fit in the capacities that you have in time T. Okay, that would be nice, but we know that this rho of T changes a lot during the pandemic, and it seems to have some kind of stochastic flavor. So we decided to assume that it was of a stochastic nature, and we decided to model using some kind of stochastic process here. And what we want to write as a constraint, something like the probability that our demand will fit in our capacity will be above 1 minus P, where P is a parameter that is given to us from the outside. So how you estimate that rho T? It should be, rho should be basically a ratio between the number of actual ICU units that you are using divided by the average number of infected people that you have. We have to correct the number of affected people because we have subnotification, but we will not talk too much about it. And then we assume that this rho of T is a time series that has an that can be modeled like this. It's an ARIMA model, okay? And you have the stochasticity, the randomness comes from this normally distributed random noise, okay? Okay, once you have this, we have to estimate from the historical data the parameters of this ARIMA time series and the variance of this random variable. We are assuming that the mean is 0, okay? And the variance of this random variable. And once we have that, we can substitute rho of T by our model, okay? And we can go from the deterministic constraint to an average constraint, but even better, we can go to a probabilistic constraint that says what we said before, which is the probability that our random process will fit in capacity is above 1 minus P, where P is a given number. And since we assumed that the random noise is normally distributed, we can actually make the algebra and find an explicit constraint for our problem that still looks like a linear constraint in the original variable. So we can add this constraint to our model as a linear constraint in our optimal control problem, in our optimization problem, our discretized optimization problem that looks like this. Some case studies. So what we did, we wrote the models and we wrote the code to solve them, okay? So what we needed to do, we needed to identify the control variables, identify the operational constraints. Operational constraints here stand for things like the capacity of IC units you have. If you have vaccination, how many vaccines can you apply every single day? If you have vaccination, for example, you have constraints that say that the second dose have to be in a time window between the first dose. So you have to do it at least 3 weeks after the first dose, at most, I don't know, 3 months after the first dose. So you have this kind of operational constraints. You have operational constraints that say what is the capacity, the testing capacity in each region of the state, something like that. So you have constraints that you add to the model to address this kind of situations. Okay. We then wrote the models in JUMP, which is a modeling language for Julia, a mathematical programming modeling language for Julia programming language. And we use it as optimization solver IPOpt. When we're modeling the problem, we have to think a little bit about it because, for example, this model, once you accept that the R0 is a variable, it would be a model with third-degree polynomials, and we wanted to avoid that. So we added extra variables so that our model was always quadratic. And since the model is quadratic, there is no need to compute the Hessian more than once. You only have to compute the Hessian once, and that was helping us a lot to speed up the solution. And you have to find the initial conditions for your differential equation. And usually we use our own code to find the initial conditions for the differential equation using historical data and trying to fit the historical data to the model. One of the nice things that our code was already assuming that the R0 would change in time. And that was very important because the historical data was a historical data not of the pure pandemic in the wild, but a pandemic in the wild with the state trying to control it by social distancing. So we had to accept that the R0 was changing in time. So what we did here, so here was one of our case studies was to look at that idea of looking at the population of the state of many subpopulations from different regions. And then since each region is in their own state in the pandemic, and also each region has a certain health capacity, we try to model, to simulate how would the disease move along time, and how much we needed to decrease the R0 to control the disease up to the ICU capacity. Okay, so here these colors, they represent that we have to decrease a lot the R0, and then we can relax a little bit and relax a little bit more. So the colors here, they are moving from a more severe lockdown to a more open society. Okay, and what we're showing here is that we can do that in a smooth way if we want, but you might also want to do in such a way that we induce that while part of the country is under a more strict condition, another part of the country, or another part of the state is under a more relaxed condition so that the economy doesn't shut down in the whole state at once. And you wanted to show that we could actually alternate between more closed moments and more open moments in such a way that the regions would also alternate among themselves, so that you also have the whole state a little bit more open. And what is interesting here is that if one region is in a very bad situation, like this region here, which is a region very close to the city of São Paulo, this fact here would induce that São Paulo will need to close, because otherwise people would move from São Paulo to this region, or would go from this region to São Paulo to work, and then they would either send the disease to São Paulo, or get the disease from São Paulo and get in an even worse situation, because São Paulo has a much higher capacity of ICU units. Actually, while we were trying to understand this, we were able to prove that if you share the ICU capacity of São Paulo and these nearby regions, you would actually decrease the necessity of making everyone so strictly restricted in their own home. Because once São Paulo have so much more capacity, ICU capacity, that it could lend a little bit for this smaller region in such a way that the region will become in a better shape, like this, actually, in a better shape. And São Paulo, by doing that, would be allowed to open its economy a little bit more without being afraid that people from that region would come to São Paulo or vice versa. So this was one of the things that we were able to do. This is a picture that comes from the paper that talks about doing testing in different regions of the state. We usually use the state of São Paulo as our subject because we live in the state of São Paulo. And to do it in the whole country, we usually don't have the data. That's one of the things. And the optimization problems become too big to solve in a reasonable amount of time. The optimization problem here has like a 250,000 variables, something like that, and a similar number of constraints, okay? And what we are showing here is that by doing testing in a smart way, we can actually, it's hard to explain the picture in a few words, but what basically shown in the paper is that it's possible to doing the testing in a smart way to get a better result than just doing the testing in a very dumb way, like we do the testing proportional to the number of people that live in the region, or we do the testing proportional to the number of people that live in the region and taking into account how many sick people there are in the region or something like that. So we have to do something which is better than this and takes into account the dynamics in time. If you do this, you can actually decrease the number of people that get sick during a certain time window. And here is our results about vaccination. And in this case, our control variable were the R naught, which we call RT here because they're changing in every moment of time, the number of first doses and the number of second doses. And we had two questions here that we are trying to answer. The first one is under what conditions it is sensible to postpone the second dose. That was something that we were doing in Brazil in the beginning of this year when we submitted the paper. We submitted the paper in February, I think, or March. And by that time, Brazil had already decided to postpone the second dose, okay? And we wanted to see if that was a good decision to make. And the second question is, what group should we vaccinate first? Because we decided here, which is quite reasonable actually, to vaccinate first the elder people. But once you start to move from the elder people to more young people, it's not that easy for you to be sure that you should do that, because usually young people have, the younger is the person, they just move more, they have more contacts because they won't go out to parties and things like that, so they get sicker and they help to spread the disease. So sometimes it's not a matter of protecting them because they usually don't go to the ICU unit, but to decrease the overall disease transmission in the region, because you don't want the elder people to get sick, because part of the elder people is not vaccinated yet. So we wanted to make some experiments about this. At the end of the day, the decision here was always you have to vaccinate first the elder people, unless the young people, the younger people just live in a very wild way. So we decided to forget this question, was not a very relevant, because the answer was always the same. The first question was more interesting, and here is the main picture. So this is a picture where we plot here in the x-axis, we have x-axis, we have the first dose efficacy. The second dose efficacy, the efficacy of the AstraZeneca vaccine, estimated from one of the papers that we had, was that it was 82.4% effective. And here, the effective in that paper, they were talking about alleviating symptoms and not talking about blocking infection. But we always knew that it is actually some kind of combination between them, the two effects. You alleviate symptoms or you decrease the number of people that go to the ICU unit, not only because you alleviate the symptom and the person gets infected, but also because part of those people don't even get infected, okay? So, and the first dose in that paper, they said that the first dose would be efficient up to 76% or something like that. So it was something very close to the second dose efficacy. So in this setting, the second dose was basically a dose to make sure that the vaccine would last a long time. It's not to increase in efficacy, but basically to make sure that the vaccine would last for a longer period of time, okay? So in this situation, it's very reasonable for you to think, okay, I have to postpone the second dose because the second dose, if I can do it, if I can postpone it, the second dose is not increasing the efficacy a lot. It's just increasing the efficacy a little. But what we wanted to do here is to do the simulation with many different possibilities for this first dose efficacy and try to see how that would behave. So what we mean this is we give to the optimization problem the decision about who and when to vaccinate. And then we want to look at the solution and see, oh, I see the optimization problem is deciding that I should postpone the second dose. Why? Because by doing this, it can open the society sooner. Good, so this is what I'm going to do. So instead of saying that I'm going to postpone the second dose because it makes sense, I have a more reasons to understand that I should do that. I should postpone the second dose or not. Or in some situations, the first dose it has a very low efficacy. It's not good to create immunity. Then naturally, the optimization model should say, okay, I don't want to postpone the second dose because it's not helping a lot. The real protection comes after the second dose. So I will try to do the second dose as soon as possible. And well, there should be some region there that we didn't know where it was. And that is what we are trying to find out here, that would say, oh, I have to move from not postponing the second dose, which this is the weeks to second dose. And the minimum number of weeks in the case of AstraZeneca is 4 weeks, okay? Up to I'm postponing the second dose as much as I can, which is 12 weeks, okay? And I want to see how this picture goes. And here is what you get, okay? So what it's saying here is that only if you really assume that your vaccine is only able to alleviate symptoms, you only decide to postpone the second dose clearly up to 12 months once the first dose is as efficacious, as good as the second dose. This is what it's saying here. And once the first dose have less than, let's say, 60 or 50% of efficacy in the first dose, it's better for you not to postpone this dose, postpone the second dose, okay? In the case of blocking infection, the thing is even more interesting because it's more like white and black. Up to 50%, you basically don't postpone a single day, the second dose. And once you get to 60%, so there is like a phase transition here or something like that. Once you get to 60%, the decision is basically you have to postpone as much as possible. Anyhow, considering that we were here like 76%, it's saying that we should really consider postponing the second dose as much as we could. And that's what we're doing in Brazil. Here is just an example of the output of the optimization problem, the number of vaccines. So here the red line is the number of first dose to the elder people from 65 up. And the dotted red line is the number of second dose. And how you know that you want to postpone the vaccine? Because the number of days between the first dose and the second dose is 84 days, which is 12 weeks, exactly. And you see that this is the basically delay that you have for every single group, unless you have at the end, because at the end you already gave first dose to basically everyone, then you just start giving second dose as soon as you can, because there is no reason for you to postpone the second dose. And as you can see, we were assuming that our vaccination capacity we would ramp up from 0.1% of the population every single day to 1% of the population after, I don't know, 120 days. So that would be 4 months, okay? And what is also interesting is by looking at the output of our code that was actually saying things like every single day, how many people are going to get infected, and from those people, how many people we're estimating they're going to need ICU units and things like that. We could also estimate the number of ICU units that would be saved if you postpone the second dose instead of not postponing the second dose. And we could get that number for that kind of thing. Okay, which is interesting. So we concluded that we would save 40 ICU admissions per 100K inhabitants in a time window of 200 days. If you start in a situation that was close to the situation that Brazil and actually the US, they were actually in a very similar situation with respect to the pandemic at the moment, were by March of this year, okay? And what is interesting here about this graph is that this is the correct decision, postpone the second dose if you're thinking about the alpha variant, the original variant of the virus. But if you think about the delta variant has a characteristic, has something that makes the first dose less efficient. And in the case of the delta variant, you usually would end up around here, around 30 or 40 efficacy in the first dose, and you really needed the second dose to get a higher efficacy. So the same paper, the same simulation was saying that for the Delta variant, you probably don't want to postpone the second dose. You want to give the second dose as soon as possible. Even though at the moment that we were doing the paper, we were writing the paper, we didn't know about the Delta variant, okay? So here in the end, saying that, well, one of those papers, the vaccination paper, is published in PNAS. Actually, the testing paper at this moment was not published, but was published like 2 weeks ago. And so it's also published here now. And we also have some code, if you want to look at the code, available for you on the internet. It's not that easy to use it, but I can help you if you want to make some use of it, okay? So this is what I wanted to say, and I thank you a lot for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Paulo, for this very interesting talk. And well, it's time for questions or comments. Please. Paulo, I can start with one, or I think, well, a very naive question, actually, regarding the control variables. There is this discussion between, or at least I read a couple of discussions about that. If the tracing is as effective as vaccination as control, well, as a control strategy. I don't know, you have some kind of comparison in this sense?
We didn't try to model that, and I can explain you to why. I wanted to model that a lot, okay? But my co-authors, they basically said, forget it, Paulo, we are never going to do that here in Brazil. Okay. We don't have the means to do it in Brazil. So it's not worth your time. Don't do it. And we never did it. But the same ideas would be able to be used to try to answer this question. So if you can do tracing like this, what is better? And then we can decide, okay, if doing tracing like this costs $2 billion, then it's worth to do it. If it costs $10 billion, no, I cannot do it, or something like that. Or you can think a little bit like that. Because what I wanted to do, it was instead of doing this, you close the society, you open the society, you close the society, you open the society, this dance, I want to do something like what there was this paper called The Hammer in the Dance in the beginning of the it's not a paper, it's like a blog post in the beginning of the pandemic that called it The Hammer in the Dance. Then the name of the project Robot Dance is because of that paper, because we are doing the dance. But what I wanted to do was really the hammer and the dance after that. But my dance, what I wanted to do was a dance that looks like contact tracing. So we do a hammer and you move the number of sick people to a very low level. So stay one month, everyone stay at home. And then you get a very low number of people. Then, since the number of people that are sick is small, you might have possibility of thinking about doing contact tracing. And if that contact tracing was able to decrease the R0 for a certain time window so that people can go back to work for 2 months. And then after that, you need 15 more days of a hammer to get back to a situation where contact tracing would work. We could try to do this kind of dance instead of opening and closing society all the time. But at the end of the day, we decided not to do it. So I believe that we can use the same ideas to model this, but we haven't actually done it. So I don't have a good answer for that.
Thank you, Paulo. Are there other questions?
I have just a curiosity. When you talk about the geographical spread, I was wondering if you use the Facebook data or Google data or the national agencies data in order to estimate the mobility within the region, or how did you estimate it? With which data?
Okay, so the data came from a telecommunications company.
Okay.
So we had information about cell phone data and a lot of information about cell phone data. And we knew if that cell phone would go from São Paulo to Campinas or for Campinas to São Paulo and for how long and things like that. So we could select the amount of people that would say at least, I don't know, 4 hours outside their own place and things like that. So we estimated that data from cell phone data. And this is actually why Pedro is one of the co-authors, because he was the guy that he actually wrote papers on that subject and how to do that in a proper way.
Okay, thank you.
It was for basically cell phone data from telecommunication companies. It was anonymized data. We didn't know the cell phone number. We had only raw numbers with fake numbers on it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Concerning this last question, do you use the data from all the cell phone companies or just the ones that were available?
I would not say all of them, but the major ones. We had Pedro had a contract with one telecommunication companies that by their turn, they had a contract with many of the major actual cell phone companies to make that kind of information available to them and anonymize it away.
I see. I have another question concerning with your objective functional. I actually missed a little bit that explanation. Perhaps you can explain or go deeper in the type of cost that were considered in the cost functional for the control.
So
because sorry, in the literature, some reports that younger vaccination is optimal for controlling the spread of the virus, while the elder vaccination is optimal for reduced mortalities. I don't know if you consider these two issues.
Okay, so I have two things to talk about. The first one is about the optimization, the objective function. Basically, our objective function was the mean R of t, the mean. We wanted to make the reproduction number as high as possible, because a high reproduction number means that you are opening the society.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so our basic objective was to maximize the mean, the sum of the RTs. Okay, this together with the dynamics would make you open the society as soon as possible. Okay, so this is what our basic objective. We also used an objective when you had many regions, that in the objective you will have two terms. One would say, I want to open the society as much as possible. But there was another term that would say, if region A is open, I would like region B to be closed. Mm-hmm. Because they have like complementary economic activities, so that when one is open, you can close the other and it's okay, and vice versa. And that would depend on every pair of cities. Okay, so this would induce that situation where you open one of the regions and you close another region, and then you have to open this one, I have to close the other one, and things like that. Okay, so that was about the objective. And about what you said is if you vaccinate the younger, you control the disease sooner. If you vaccinate the elder one, you control the number of admissions. In our case, it's more complicated than that, because if you just do like this, you don't take into account the dynamics, what will going to happen a long time. Because to stop sooner is not acceptable, it's not a feasible point in our problem, because if you stop sooner, you accept that for a short period of time, you have more people than you have ICU capacity. Okay, so this is not acceptable. It's not feasible in our problem. For example, so that idea that vaccinating the younger, you stop sooner, that's probably true. But it's not a feasible problem. It's not a feasible point in our problem, because to stop sooner, you have the elder ones not vaccinated, and they go to the ICU very fast. So that's why you decide to vaccinate the elder ones, because by doing this, you decrease the pressure on the health system faster. And this is actually your main constraint. And it's interesting that in optimization, the constraints, they are more important than the objective, because the constraints, they have to be obeyed throughout the whole time horizon. While the objective is just a driving force, the constraint is like a wall. You have to remain in one of the sides of the wall. Okay, so this is one of the things that we like about this kind of approach, where you have the constraint that says that, okay, but no matter what we're talking about, you only can take into account possibilities where you actually don't see a saturation in your health system. So you don't say less sensible things like, oh, we can vaccinate the younger, and this will make the disease go away sooner. Yeah, that's true, but you had 3 weeks where people were dying on the streets. We don't want to see that. Okay.
Yeah, clear. Thank you.
Welcome.
It's also a matter of fairness, maybe, because concerning the constraint, so you recommend to consider objective that cannot be related directly, because we are making a priori decision if you put these costs in the functional, in the objective functional.
Oh, of course. This is only a possible objective. Actually, if you want to use that in the real life, you have to talk to your decision maker and ask him what is the real objective that he has. Because this is actually a sad objective in some sense, because in this case, what we're saying is that people can get sick. There is only one constraint, which is you cannot saturate your health system, but people can get as sick as you want. Okay, but and why we didn't put in our objective something like minimize the number of sick people? Because we know what the optimization method we're going to do. It's going to say, okay, put everyone at home. And then I minimize the number of, if you do that with vaccination, the solution would be everyone will be at home until the vaccination campaign ends. And then people can go out. Mm-hmm. So it's not easy to find really good objectives for this kind of things, because in one sense, you are doing something that makes sense, but you also seeing that we're allowing people to get sick and you don't feel comfortable with that.
Okay, thank you, Paulo. Thank you for your presentation. It's really impressive work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there more questions or comments?
Yes, I have one question. More than a question, it's curiosity. You said that you estimate the initial condition of your model, of your OG model, but you say that you use your own code. Can you explain what kind of methods do you use to estimate the initial condition, or what did you do?
Okay, so the code, once you're solving the optimization problem, you are also solving the differential equation, okay? So if you do that and you add an objective that says that the solution that you're going to get from the differential equation is going to fit the data, then you are trying to find the condition. So we started from the initial, when you basically don't have anyone who is sick. So you know basically the values of all the variables. There is a very small I. The S is basically 1. The recovery is basically 0. The other states are basically 0. Maybe you have something. If you have exposed, you need to have someone in the exposed, maybe not even in I in the beginning. Okay, so you can add constraints that say, oh, the susceptible in the beginning of the time should be at least 99.99% of the population. Okay, and then you use your code to find the dynamics that will give you that curve. So it's a curve fitting, a nonlinear curve fitting that we're doing with the code. One of the interesting things that we can do, and usually people cannot do, is that we are assuming that the R0 is changing through time. And that is very important because it's actually changing through time. So we have also to estimate the R0 along the whole time horizon. Okay. And in order to avoid overfitting of the R0, because if you allow the R0 change every single day, you can get a perfect fit, but it's not really sensible. We add some kind of total variation regularization in the R0 so that you only change a little, not always, just a little in few moments of time.
Okay.
Okay, and we can actually put information in the code like, I know that we did a lockdown here. So here the R0 has to be below something because I know that under that situation, the R0 cannot go up to this point. So you can actually add information to your model to help you get a better estimation of your parameters.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there more questions, comments? Well, if this is not the case, thank you, Paulo, again for accepting our invitation and for this really, really interesting talk. As Pedro said, it's a very, very impressive work. So thanks a lot. Thank you all guys for participating in this edition of our seminar. See you in a couple of weeks, since next week, as you know, it's holiday here in Ecuador. So we will retake the seminar probably at 2 weeks from now. Thank you again. Please take care, Paulo. And
thank you a lot for the invitation, and thank you for attending. See you later.
Fortunately, in person.
In person, yes, we have to see ourselves in person.
Soon.
We can't stand anymore. It's like I'm starting to have money to travel, which is weird because usually there is a lack of money to travel. But since I'm not traveling, the money is staying in the bank.
So well,
It's time for.
for us,
But
you will-
I'm
you will
already
be-
I'm already
Oh,
fully
welcome.
vaccinated. So that's good.
You're welcome. You should be planning to come here actually. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
next year we're going to resume traveling. Okay, so see you around.
See you. Thank you.
See you.
Thank
See you.
you.
Bye. Thank you.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.